Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the podcast Discos Memorables, or in this case, since it's going to be in English, Memorable Records. This is Anton Garcia-Fernandez talking to everybody out there, and we're coming to you today live, of course, because we're recording this live, from Martin in the state of Tennessee, in northwest Tennessee, from the university here, and we're going to have a very special show for many reasons. First of all, because we really enjoy the music of this man, but also because so many years after his last album was put out, around 1980 or so. So we're talking about probably, 40 years or something like that. But in any case, 30-odd years since these recordings were made, we finally have a new album by Harry Nilsson, and it's Harry Nilsson that we're going to be talking about today with my good friend and colleague here at the university, Dan Nappo. Dan, welcome back to Memorable Records.
Thank you so much, Anton. I've been looking forward to this, and I love Harry's music, and I really like this album a lot.
Well, I must say that I heard that this album was coming out on the Beatles channel on Sirius XM radio, and when I heard that this album was coming out, you're the first person I thought of, because I thought, I need to get this album for Dan because I know that he's going to like it. But apparently you liked it even more than I thought you would.
I really did. What did you think when you heard this was coming out? Did you think it was going to be such a good album?
I wasn't sure, because you can never be sure what these demos and recordings that are left on the shelf are going to sound like all these years later. But one thing I can say that I think is important is that I knew from what they were saying that they had really taken very good care of producing this album, with the production of this album. And so I was happy to hear that, because after so many years not hearing from Nilsson,
right?
This is really a great thing for those of us who enjoys music.
For the record, this album is Losst and Founnd, with double S in the Lost and double N in the Found, and it's been released on Omnivore Recordings, on November 22nd, 2019. And as my friend said, this is the first album by Harry Nilsson released in over 30 years.
Yeah, you know that Harry Nilsson...
Or since his death, almost 30 years.
Yeah, he passed away in 1994, and these recordings were made around 1993 or something like that, so we're talking about a little bit less than 30 years ago, and as we will discuss, they still sound fresh, they still sound great.
When you told me about it, I thought, oh, this isn't going to be good. I wanted to retreat to the old classic albums by him and listen to those. I didn't want anything that was going to, jeopardize that sort of high esteem that I had for him as a recording artist. Right? Because once it's out of his hands, he could get a bunch of hacks in there in the studio and just do something terrible. But fortuitously, it came out, and I dare say it's a masterpiece. I think that with more time passing, we'll know for sure. But I just feel really positively about this album.
Well, I do too, and this leads me to think a little bit about the first time I heard Harry Nilsson, which was many years ago. My father, again, he had, I think, the old 45 of Without You, which was a big hit record for him worldwide, and also in Spain, and so that was really my introduction to the music of Harry Nilsson, more than Everybody's Talking, right, which also was a big hit record for him. But the first time I heard his voice, I was very impressed by the quality of that voice, and how great the song really sounded. It was very catchy. It was very difficult to forget, and back then my knowledge of English was very limited, but I still liked to sing along with this track. And then, of course, I discovered his relationship with the Beatles, and of course you can hear that also in his music. But
right.
But if you read his biography, and also watching that documentary, Who is Harry Nilsson, which came out a few years ago.
I didn't know about his biography. I'll have to look for that.
Then you see that he really had an important relationship with the Beatles, and particularly with John Lennon, and we can talk about that in just a bit. But how did you become acquainted with the music of Harry Nilsson?
I guess I came to his music in kind of a haphazard, almost patchwork fashion. I remember the movie Midnight Cowboy, the John Schlesinger film with Dustin Hoffman and John Voight. And I remember Everyone's Talking, which is a song that Harry didn't write, but he sang it extremely well. He also sings one of his own songs on there. I think it's called God Must Be in New York City, New York, something like that. But I enjoyed his voice, but I didn't follow up on it. And then I heard Without You, and I didn't know that was by Harry Nilsson, and it's kind of a song that was always sort of a guilty pleasure of mine. I thought it was a little bit over the top when I used to hear it, shortly after it came out, I'd say in the early 70s. I remember hearing it when I was a kid. And then, of course, I heard the Three Dog Night song, One, which was written by Harry Nilsson. I knew the Monkees had at least one of his songs. And then in 1993, 94, right about the time Harry died, unfortunately, Coconut makes its appearance in Quentin Tarantino's film.
Pulp Fiction.
Pulp Fiction. Yeah. And so then I decided to give it a look, and I listened to some of his music, and I was really, really, really captivated by the Nilsson album, the one where he's standing there with his pipe in front of his refrigerator with so many great songs on it. I mean, that's one of my favorite albums of all time. I liked Son of Schmilsson, or Son of Schmilsson.
Yes.
And then I went back further and got his musical story, The Point. I liked that. I liked his earlier works too. So I just think he's just incredibly talented. I came around, I wanted to get the album that he did with John Lennon, of course. I mean, who would
Pussycats.
Pussycats. Who wouldn't want, to listen to music made by John Lennon and Harry Nilsson? And I had a hard time finding it, but eventually I found a copy, and I liked it, although I didn't like it as much as you did. It's one of your favorite albums. But if the Beatles loved Harry Nilsson, I know it had to be good, and so that kind of drew me to it. I remember seeing an interview with the Beatles on YouTube, and they were asking John and Paul who their favorite American bands were, or favorite American musicians, and Paul said, Nilsson.
And it's true because, he was known as Harry Nilsson, but also simply as Nilsson.
Yeah.
At least in Spain, that's, people knew him as Nilsson more than just
that's
the
what you
whole
see
name.
in the soundtrack for the Midnight Cowboy album. So I came around kind of haphazard, but I would say in the last 3-4 years, I've become a big fan of Harry Nilsson. Love his voice. I love his sense of humor. I love his lyrics. I love the paradoxical way that he sings about things. He's quirky, but quirky in a way that's always intriguing. Big fan. And I thought this new album really put a really nice bit of closure on his career, and I'm glad it happened because, as you said, well, let's elaborate a little bit more about what happened towards the end of his career, how he lost his voice. But to me, I thought his career is sort of an unfinished career in a lot of ways. It's quite tragic what happened to him. But this sort of redeems his career to a great extent, I feel.
Well, I agree with that, and you were talking before about the album that really is probably the most important album in his career, which is Nilsson Schmilsson. And let's say that Dan is that tired today in a very correct way for this podcast, because he's sporting his Harry Nilsson T-shirt. Now no one can see that, but I don't know many people that would walk around with a Harry Nilsson shirt, which is good because I love his music, but it definitely would be a good way to start a conversation. If somebody sees you wearing a Harry Nilsson shirt and they're like, "Oh, you're wearing a Harry Nilsson shirt," because when I wear my Bing Crosby shirt, nobody ever says anything about that.
You just have to go to the right places, Anton. Like maybe a nursing home.
But going back to the Nilsson Schmilsson album, to me that really is his masterpiece. But do you think that would be the album that maybe somebody that doesn't know much about Harry Nilsson should begin by?
Oh, definitely, absolutely. There's so many great songs on that album. It's got pop, it's got rock, it's got a little Caribbean. Very, very eclectic, and the songs are all catchy. The new, the expanded edition, the remastered edition, has about 6 additional songs, demos and so forth, that are really fascinating too. So I would start there for anybody interested in Nilsson's music. I think that was really his high point. He started working with sort of a popmeister producer named Richard Perry, who did a very good job, I thought. He managed to wring Harry's talent out of him at a moment when Harry had a lot going on, but was just about to sort of, I think, lose the necessary discipline he needed to continue making great albums like that. So, but yeah, I would definitely start with that album.
But Harry was always his own man, really, because, you know, he had a sound. I feel like I have the box set that has all of his RCA albums, and if you listen, I haven't done this yet, but I'm sure if you listen to one after the other, you will see that he was not the kind of singer who was worried about or interested in following the most popular trends at the time. He would have a little bit of that in his albums,
Right.
but then what he liked was variety, and I think he liked variety within each album, but also just in general, going from one project to the next. He always liked to change, which, you know, is very easy to see when you think that he even recorded an album of standards, A Touch of Schmilsson in the Night, that, you know, he was doing this at a time when pretty much no pop singer was doing this. I mean, Ringo Starr had recorded Sentimental Journey, which was in a way like that. But in his case, he really went back and tried to get some of the arrangers that had worked, you know, with Sinatra and with some of the classic singers of classic pop. So he really, his discography really is, you know, really varied and wide-ranging, and that's one of the things that I admire about him, together with his voice, which, you know, was fantastic at the beginning of his career. But then that album that you were talking about before that I like a lot, Pussycats. And his relationship with John Lennon at a time when John was really troubled, you know, separated from Yoko. And
Lost Weekend.
That Lost Weekend, that's what they call it.
Longer than a weekend. But
it was a lost weekend for John, even though it was longer than a weekend. And then somehow it was also, or it turned out to be, a lost voice for Harry Nilsson, which is pretty sad.
It was a tragedy because, as you say, Harry had just this remarkable voice. I mean, I've read, I don't know enough about it myself, but his voice had a range of 3.5 octaves. And you can hear it. You can hear it on a lot of the early songs, that just the melodies that he maintains. In fact, he relies on his voice so much in that early music. You hear him playing piano, and you know, he wasn't a schooled pianist, but he was really funky, very, very percussive. And a lot of his best music, I think, is that kind of percussive piano sound, and his voice just carries the melody and does so much more.
Well, Gotta Get Up comes to mind when you...
Gotta Get Up, yeah.
Right?
I mean, and also Without You is another one. You know, so I think that was a real model for the kind of songs that he liked to write. And he could do it, whereas a lot of people couldn't. You know, they had to have a lot more support behind their voice. He liked to do harmonies with himself, too, which is the one aspect of this album, Lost and Found, that isn't reproduced. Everything else about Harry Nilsson you'll find on here, except maybe Caribbean. More about that later. But you don't hear him singing his own backup harmonies on this album. It's other people. They do a good job. But I thought that was kind of a Harry Nilsson sort of thing on his early albums too.
Now you do like Pussycats, but not as much as I do. What is it about Pussycats that kind of, you know, you don't like as much?
His voice. His voice. To me, it's sad to me to hear him trying to sing a song as beautiful as Jimmy Cliff's Many Rivers to Cross. And I know that's not the way he wanted it to sound. It's so raspy and scratchy, and he can't hit those high notes. That album, to me, has a lot of really good music on it, and I enjoy listening to it. But I don't think it sunk in with Harry that he just couldn't sing songs like the ones he had sung. Which brings me back to this new album. He's found a way to sing really well songs that aren't going to force him to do things he can't do. I think the songs in this album are perfectly adapted to where his voice was. And it does, in fact, his voice has recovered by about the time he recorded this. He sings some songs extremely well. But that golden voice of, pre-1974, it's gone. It was his talisman. He could always fall back on that.
And really the sad thing about Pussycats, in retrospect, is that a song as beautiful as Jimmy Cliff's Many Rivers to Cross, just a few months before those sessions, he would have been able to tackle.
It would have been great. It would have been magnificent.
But those excesses, those nights of drugs and alcohol and partying, and then those shrieks and screams in the studio with a John that was completely out of control, and of course Harry was as well. That really, all of that completely did him in. And after those sessions, as good as the album I think is, it is too bad, because what you hear after that, what you get after 1974, in many ways is a completely different artist.
He had to reinvent himself. You're not going to win a screaming match with the guy who sang Twist and Shout and Dizzy Miss Lizzy, and to say nothing of the Plastic Ono album.
Yes.
The Plastic Ono Band album that he did.
That was around the time when he was dealing with or dabbling in that primal scream therapy with Dr. Yanov in New York, where basically the idea, which I've never believed, but was that you could regenerate yourself by screaming all your anger and all your frustrations out, and
like a catharsis.
So yeah, but
Harry's voice was this priceless, Ming Dynasty vase, and he smashed it. He smashed it. It's a tragedy, but something's been lost and found. With this album. So it's a good conclusion to his career.
Lost and Found is the title of this album by Harry Nilsson that just came out a few months ago, at the end of last year, 2019, on Omnivore Recordings, and it really is recommendable, and we're chatting about it today with Dan Nappo. My name is Anton Garcia-Fernandez, and this is a new episode of the podcast Memorable Records, or Discos Memorables, when I do it in Spanish. Now, we need to talk a little bit about this album, of course, but also a little bit about the years leading up to this album, which were among some of the hardest years in Harry Nilsson's career, in the sense that he had not really recorded an album since around 1980, by the time he entered the studio to make the demos or the tracks that would become the basis for Lost and Found. He really didn't do much throughout the 1980s. He referred to himself as a retired musician. He didn't really record an album that we can speak of. He did appear in public sporadically, like at Beatle Fests, and I think he contributed a song or so to an album in tribute to Yoko Ono, I think. But other than that, he really didn't do much. Most of what he did in the 80s, in fact, didn't have much to do with music. He also had or founded a film and TV production company, but that didn't go anywhere. That didn't really do much with that. And he was, most of all, and this is something that we really need to mention, he was deeply affected by the assassination of John Lennon at the end of 1980. And he really felt that very deeply. I don't know how much in contact he was with John Lennon after 1974 and in those later years of John's life, when he went back to Yoko and had another child, and then basically became kind of retired himself at home for a while, and then began recording again. I'm talking about John in this case. I don't know in those later years of John's life how much Harry was in contact with John, but by the time John was killed at the end of 1980, he was deeply affected by this, the death of his friend, and he became, and I like to hear this really, quite the activist for gun control. Perhaps in the belief that with more gun control, situations like that would not be as common.
If only we had heeded what he had said back then. No, Harry was a difficult person, it's clear, but I think his heart was in the right place. Apart from the depression he probably felt after John's death, do you think he was also really disillusioned with the music industry?
Oh, I'm sure he was.
It was his last few albums, right, of the 70s, during the disco era and so forth. They didn't sell.
And that's an important point.
RCA didn't pick up his contract.
No, and I think in part it probably had to do with what happened to his voice, but not necessarily. Right. Because he did reinvent himself, like you said. But I think it also had a lot to do with what you're mentioning, the changes in music tastes and musical trends in the late 1970s, which did not help him. It was not something that he was interested in. It was not, disco music, for example, was not something that he identified with in any way. At least I don't think so. And so, yes, his albums from the late 70s did not sell nearly as well, nowhere near as well as the earlier albums from the late 60s, early 70s, like Nilsson, Schmilsson, and Son of Schmilsson and others. I think that might be one of the reasons why after 1980 he only recorded sporadically. He didn't really do much with music. And as I said before, he referred to himself as a retired musician, and he was practically retired throughout the 1980s, which is too bad, because if you think about it, he could have made some good records in the 80s.
Yes. Yeah,
I always feel like the 80s are sort of a wasteland in many ways for some of these musicians that were popular before the 80s. And some people even say that, or wonder what would John Lennon have done in the 80s? Mm-hmm. How would he have sounded? If you think about, for example, the kind of records that McCartney made in the 80s, which, some critics feel are not as good as some of his earlier ones from the 70s. But I think in the case of Nilsson, he was alive. He could have done some stuff, but he chose not to. Mm-hmm. He was sort of like a Bartleby of sorts, Yeah. I'd rather not do anything.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. Even in his most acclaimed albums, there's something, a kind of a self-destructive quality. Mm-hmm. Look, for example, like the album, a really good album of his, the Son of Schmilsson, mm-hmm. which followed Nilsson Schmilsson. Why would he have released a single and drop the F-bomb in it? Mm-hmm. Over and over. It's like he didn't have any patience for the process of writing songs and recording songs and the whole marketing aspect of his music. I think he got fed up with that, and in a way, it's not surprising to me that he ruined his voice in some ways if he was drinking and doing such self-destructive behavior. It's a really perplexing story. Somebody with this prodigious talent could just destroy it.
And especially that song, because it really was a catchy song, mm-hmm. that could have, it could have been a hit. It could have been, all over the radio. But of course, after you throw in a certain word, then mm-hmm. then that's not going to happen anymore, right? So even today, in many ways. Mm-hmm. So I think you're right. He was also a man who, like Paul McCartney, he had the gift of melody. Mm-hmm. He was really good at, I don't know if it was easy or hard for him. I think for Paul, sometimes it comes a little too easily, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know if that was the case for Nilsson or not, but a lot of his tracks, a lot of the songs that he wrote, including some on Losst and Founnd, are so easily recognizable, are so mm-hmm. catchy. It's mm-hmm. almost impossible to get them out of your head after after a while.
He had a real gift for melody, that's for sure.
So he definitely did have that. And he just chose not to do much in the 1980s in the way of music. But by the time we reach the 90s, he's in financial difficulties, in real dire straits, because of the fact that his financial advisor, whatever that is, embezzled most of his money, ran away with the money, and left him and his wife and his family with pretty much nothing.
Pretty much all his earnings that he had socked away and made, and interest had grown upon from his early part, his successful part of his career, gone. He had none of that. He was depending on that, basically.
Yeah, absolutely, and he doesn't have it anymore. I don't know, maybe not, but I don't know if this is the reason why he decides to go back into the studio. But what he does in the early 90s, around 92, 93, just about, is he starts laying down the tracks for what now we know as Lost with double S and Found with double N.
I'm glad you elaborated on his biography, and especially the stuff in the 80s, all the things that he suffered, because I think it plays right into this particular album. There's a very redemptive quality in this album. It's Lost and Found, and it's sort of a resurgence of the things that he had done right in the late 60s and early 70s, I think, on this album. I think I told you when I heard it, when I listen to an album, very rarely do I like it from the first hearing. I got to hear it a couple of times. I liked most of the songs on this album the first time I heard them. And to me, it felt like it was an album delivered from the 1969 by Angels. I was so impressed with it. So to me, it's a very redemptive statement for this man's career.
Well, this album would have been his first in over a decade had it come out at the time.
Right.
But of course, he died before he could complete it, before he could be.
This isn't the first
released.
kind of album that was released posthumously, when a great artist, just left some things and somebody else patched it together, cobbled together the album, and most of the time it turns out badly. But in this case, I think it's an important contribution and enhances our appreciation of Harry Nilsson.
And that's the reason why I wanted to do a podcast about this particular album, because you and I talk almost daily about albums that we like and that we could be doing podcasts about. But of course,
Rolling Stone, are you listening?
Yeah, the Fine Burrito Brothers, or Graham Parsons, or whoever it is.
They'd make us review garbage albums.
Yeah,
we're better off doing this.
But when he began recording these songs, by this time he was working with a longtime friend of his named Mark Hudson. And Mark Hudson is the producer of this album, was the producer of the sessions originally that began this process that so many years later we see coming to an end and so well. And so what Mark Hudson did was to complete this album, to fulfill this project. And he says in the notes that he writes, I think he writes a letter to Harry Nilsson there as part of the notes, and he says something along the lines of, I finally was able to finish this project that I told you I would finish at some point, somewhere around there. He says something along those lines. And so what did he do in order to complete this album? Well, he brought in great studio musicians like Van Dyke Parks, Klaus Voormann, there's a connection to the Beatles again, Jim Keltner, the great drummer, Jimmy Webb, who also writes one of the songs. And so what do we find on this album? We find 9 originals by Harry Nilsson plus one cover of a song by Yoko, of all people. You don't really see a lot of Yoko songs covered by other people, but this is an example, and a really good one. And then, as I said, the last song on the album was written by Jimmy Webb. So it is an album that was begun in the early 90s. It was never finished. It was shelved because Nilsson passed away, unfortunately, in 1994. And all these years later, 2 decades later, just about, Mark Hudson goes back to these tapes and fulfills this desire that he had for a long time to finish this album as some sort of coda, and as some sort of, I guess, not epitaph, but like epilogue maybe to his to the recording career of Harry Nilsson. And so I think it's a great album, like you said. I think it's very tastefully done, and from my perspective, it's really a great addition to the discography of Harry Nilsson.
Yeah, I mean, clearly it was a labor of love for Mark Hudson, and the fact that he brought in these other musicians and friends of Harry to finish it, I think that's what makes it such a successful album, because they knew Harry, they knew his quirks, they knew what kind of music he wanted to make, and so they could fill in the blanks basically of what Harry loved. I see now, looking at the liner notes, he actually does have recorded background vocals too. So I mean, this is a perfect album to enjoy if you like his earlier stuff. Actually, this wouldn't be a bad album either to learn more about him. I mean, I think this album stands alongside his best work, maybe his second or third best album.
I agree with that in the sense that, and I think maybe part of the reason why we feel this way is that, as you said before, it's so unexpected. First of all, that these recordings even existed. I didn't know that.
It's a singular situation in a lot of ways, because I don't know of any other artist from that era that we love so much, the 60s, having an album come out in 2019, quietly, under the radar, and the reviews I've seen of it, I don't think people know what to make of it, frankly. I don't think it's received very good reviews, but at the same time, the people who did the reviewing probably didn't know his music in the first place because they weren't born yet. So there's a delay. This is an album he should have made in '73. And so there's already that delay, and then it comes out after he died. So it's really it's the opposite of a foregone conclusion.
And I think, to prove your point, apparently the record label, when he presented these tracks to them, they said no. They rejected those.
What was the story about that? And then he turned and he said something to them.
I'm not sure if exactly what it was that he said, but it was almost like they were trying to insinuate, or not even insinuate, to say to him, you're stuck in the past.
Yeah,
you don't understand, the new music from the early '90s. This is almost like traveling back to the 1970s. We don't think this is going to sell, and I think he said something like, "No, I think you are the ones that don't understand anything about music or about what I'm trying to do."
I can imagine that happening.
It would be, I think, very frustrating, really frustrating for somebody like Harry Nilsson that had not worked on an album project in so many years, to come up with songs, in some cases that are as good as some of these are, and then present them to some record executives who are not always known for, knowing a lot about music in some cases, right? And have them flat out reject them the way they did. Unfortunately for us, back then they did, because we would have heard this album a lot earlier, right?
Yeah,
Maybe.
that's true. Yeah.
But fortunately, because now, so many years later, this
is definitely a breath. I can't say it's fresh air. It's old air, but it's welcome old air. If you just look at the songs, I mean, Losst and Founnd has a great, memorable guitar riff, just like Jump Into the Fire. Woman, Oh Woman, who's got the percussive piano, kind of the extended, meandering chorus. UCLA, the play on words. Harry loved lyrics that had words that have double meanings. Where it's petal of a flower or petal of a car. It's all here. It's all here. The irreverent humor, surprise endings, like an Animal Farm. And one of the reviews said that the production was overblown, and maybe they're referring to like what does a woman see in a man, but that's part of the joke.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Harry's singing all these really ridiculous lyrics describing this guy as an orangutan and flicking his cigarettes in the can. And we had this beautiful orchestration behind us, like Masterpiece Theater or something.
Yeah, going back to that Dutch of Nilsson in the Night.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. It shows us just about everything he ever did. Like I said, the only thing that's missing perhaps is the Caribbean flavored song a la Coconut or Daybreak or something like that. But that's okay. I mean, I think it's just terrific. Somebody else said that the humor is cheesy on it. That's Harry. That's Harry Nilsson. If you listen to his early stuff, you'd understand. You know, I watched the video of him singing "Everybody's Talking." It's an old black and white video. He belches before he starts singing. You can tell that he's belching. He's completely straight faced. I mean, that's just the way he was. So, I'll if it's cheesy nowadays, I'll take it. So.
Well, since you began talking about the songs, I think one of the things that we normally do when we get together to talk about a specific recording or album on memorable records, so Discos Memorables, is to go song by song and briefly explain how we feel about the song, what we think about it, describe it a little bit for some of the listeners that may not have heard the album yet. And of course we can't play any of the songs for copyright reasons, but if you happen to have the album, you can always play it and see what you think, if you agree with our views on these songs or not. And there's 11 of them, so we could start with the first one, which is titled just like the album, but not quite, because it doesn't double the S, it doesn't double the N, but the song is called Lost and Found. What do you think about that one as, let's say, as an album opener?
I think it's a good one, especially for an album to come out in the early 70s. I think this would have been, I don't know if it would have been a hit single, but it has the sound of a hit single from a different era. And it has a sort of a contagious guitar riff, strong verse, strong bridge, strong chorus. It sounds like a single to me. And the message of it, Lost and Found, what a joy, what a miracle. It's a perfect title track for this album, because the album itself has been lost and found, and in many ways I think it's a miracle. So.
I love the opening riff, on it. So you play the CD or the vinyl, because I think it's also been released on vinyl. In fact, it might have been released on vinyl, or at least when I looked on Amazon. For a couple of days or 3 days, you could only find a vinyl copy of it, and then finally the CD came on there.
Right.
I don't know if that was done on purpose, or if it was, or maybe if it was a glitch or what it was, but it's also available on vinyl. So when you put the needle on the vinyl, or when you press the play button, you hear that opening riff, and it really does transport you back to a different time, or to those years of Nilsson's heyday. I love that, and I think the song really bounces along very nicely.
It's a great song.
It is a catchy tune again. I think he does have this knack for writing songs that are catchy, and he hasn't lost that. And if he lost it, he's found it. By the beginning of the 1990s.
Yeah, it's a great song. It's a great way to start the album. Woman, oh woman, that's my favorite song on the album.
And you said that to me. Now, what makes "Woman Oh Woman" your favorite song among these?
The melody is just infectious. I mean, you can't get this song out of your head even after a first hearing. It has that perfect Nilsson irreverence too. Here's a song about a woman he loves, and if I remember the first line, it's this classic Nilsson. It's like, if you knew true devotion, you'd jump into the ocean and drown. Going down, thinking of me.
I like also the rhyming scheme there, with like a little internal rhyme there.
Yeah.
But I think you're right about the fact that, to me, it really is reminiscent of his 1970s stuff.
It sounds a little bit like the Moonbeam song in some ways. It has sort of the same tempo. His voice sounds terrific on it. He's not hitting all the high notes, and it's not as as epic a voice as it used to be. But he sounds really soulful on it, and I just really enjoy this song a lot. I think it's terrific.
And one thing about it that I like is the accordion.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Van Dyke Parks plays that accordion.
Isn't that a nice touch?
And it really is a nice touch. So we don't have the Caribbean influence on this album, but we do have that accordion that kind of weaves in and out of some of the songs. And
absolutely.
And I just love that. I think I wouldn't say that the accordion makes the song, but it does add to it. A certain charm that it just wouldn't have if it didn't have the accordion.
Hit the nail on the head. His best music, like some of the songs on Nilsson, have just something extra. If you listen to a tune of his, like, what's the one I like so much? Let the Good Times Roll.
Mm-hmm.
Just that part in the middle where the band picks up the tempo a little bit, and you hear this beautiful harmonica solo.
Yes,
this is like that.
Mm-hmm.
This is just like that.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good connection. Yeah. Now the next one,
this is your favorite.
Is one that I really like, and it's called UCLA, about the university, or maybe not.
I'm not sure what it's about. He sings about an awful lot of different things. Talking to his car. When you're west of me, UCLA. Some of his play on words. I think you like it because of the Beatle references.
Absolutely, yeah. I like all those Beatle references there.
At least four, I think.
That he throws in to Ringo and to the Beatles. And I think one of the reasons why it is my favorite song on the album has to do with not just the Beatles references, but I think that musically it does have a lot in common with the Beatles. Mm-hmm. And I love that relaxed, easygoing melody that it has. It's not that it makes me relax, which it does, but it's just a really nice tune. It's not even a catchy tune. It's just a tune that somehow transports you.
Yeah.
You kind of let yourself go. You play into what he's trying to do there, even if you're not sure completely what that is, even if you're not sure what he's singing about. Probably not about the university.
Probably not.
But I like that. And then another thing that I love about this song is the dobro that you hear on it. Mm-hmm. It just...
another one of those nice, unexpected touches.
Yes, because you don't think when the song starts that it's going to have that.
Mm-hmm. It's perfect.
But the organ and the dobro, I think, are just two things about this song that just makes the song irresistible.
Ricky Z, the musician who plays that. The Beatles songs I think that he alludes to in this are Penny Lane, Yesterday, and Something. Mm-hmm. Do you think those were Harry's favorite songs? Beatles?
It could be, and if whether they are or not. Now, if they are, then he really has a very good taste.
Yeah, I would say so.
But one thing I would say, and I don't know if you would agree with this. Did you say Penny Lane? Yeah, Penny Lane, Something, and Yesterday. Mm-hmm. In some ways, I can see, and this just came to me now as you mentioned them, I see a musical connection between those songs and Nilsson, in the sense that those are songs that would be really well suited for his voice and his style. So I don't know if that is what it is, but those are Beatles songs that he could have handled really well. So, but more than that, I just love the tune. That arrangement with the dobro and the organ, and then of course the sound that is very very Beatle-esque. Not just because of the mentions of the Beatles and the allusions to them, but just the sound of it.
I wonder what his one-time friend and producer Richard Perry would have thought of those three songs and these arrangements, because they're like the arrangements that he tried to do with him, and he did do with him on his earlier work on those two albums that we like so much. I think they took a page right out of Richard Perry's book.
Absolutely, and I think that is what really transports us back to the early 1970s era of Nilsson's recording career.
The next song, the two song. It's a melody of two different songs. The High Heel Sneakers and Rescue Boy. this is one of the examples for me that shows Harry singing in a new range. Maybe this wasn't a song he would have done before, but this song needed somebody to sing kind of in a low voice, a raspy voice, and is made to order for him at this point in his career, I think. And he sounds great singing.
Well, he steps into blues territory finally in this
Exactly,
one. And I think his latter-day voice, the voice that he had at the end of his career, is good for this sort of material. It's too bad. And that's, again, what I was talking about before when I was saying he chose not to do anything in the 80s, but had he chosen to do something, maybe a bluesy sort of album would have been, a good choice for him. And this song, which is a medley, like you said, but it has the classic rhythm and blues song, High Heel Sneakers, in there. And he plays around with that and the melody. And it's a good example of Harry Nilsson rooted in the blues, which, it's something that you don't hear very often.
No, you don't.
In his earlier work.
You hear it on a couple of tunes that were outtakes. Into the Fire a little bit has some bluesy qualities to it too. But yeah, it's a nice song for this particular.
And I kind of like also the fact that it is placed in between two songs that are not blues songs in the sense that they are more ballads, sort of relaxing sort of songs.
Yeah, the sequence of songs on this is clearly they put some thought into it. I think they did a good job with that. Any album that I really like has a particular sequence that I think is memorable, and in some ways it's essential to the pleasure that you derive from the album.
And it's interesting because he didn't have a say on any of this, but somehow I feel like he would have approved.
Yeah.
Now the next one that I was mentioning is simply called Lullaby, and that's another gem of a song, I think.
It's wonderful, and maybe it reflects a little bit of what he was doing in the 80s. I have the sense, although it's not conclusive from the documentary that I saw, but he became something of a family man and turned his back on his career. And this is just a beautiful little song, a lullaby that he wrote for, I think it was his son, reassuring him that he and his mother were still going to be there, and his toys are going to sleep. And it's just a really sincere, cute song. It's really a heartwarming song without being schmaltzy.
And I think it's interesting that you say that you have the feeling that he retreated back into the home and became a family man and that kind of thing, because I had written down in my notes about this song that it does remind me a little bit of the later years of John Lennon's career. And John Lennon did precisely that in the later years of his career, and he wrote songs like "Beautiful Boy" and songs for Sean, and
this song does recall "Beautiful Boy," doesn't it?
It does a little bit, but if not that one in particular or any particular song, it does sound to me like the sound that John was achieving in those later years, late 70s, right before he was killed, and. I have the feeling that on this particular song, his voice, Nilsson's voice, sounds a little weaker than on some of the others. But, it's fine. It's not a problem because it's a lullaby. When I'm singing a lullaby to my daughter at night, I don't need to have, the voice of a Mario Lanza, so I.
It's probably better that you don't.
So she'll fall asleep, right? So I think the tune is again catchy, but this is typical of Nilsson's music. And then, even though the voice is a little weaker, it still sounds good for the kind of song it is.
Absolutely, yes. So we've done 5 songs. We've got a hit single. We've got a classic Nilsson song, "Woman Oh Woman." We've got sort of a meandering, really likable song with some play on words and some references to his friends, the Beatles. Then we've got a classic blues-oriented song, and now we've got a lullaby. So what's next? Should we go to New Orleans?
That's true. It is true that he doesn't do a lot of blues, but he does have a liking for the music of New Orleans, for that Dixieland jazz and the brass bands and all that. And I think it's clear on this next song, which, it's called Animal Farm, but I don't know if you agree, but I think this song sounds a lot more like Bob Dylan than it does like George Orwell.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like Dylan. The lyrics are clever. I listened to this in my car, and as the song was sort of developing, just layer, a new instrument, the arrangements, just everything that was added to it just simply got better and better. And I think this song is a masterpiece. I think this song is one of his best songs ever. You have to hear it. The brass that's on it is terrific. The lyrics are funny. The musicianship outstanding, and his voice sounds great. Although, as you say, he sings sort of like Dylan in this particular song.
But I think that's a good thing in the sense that, when we mentioned that he had to reinvent himself, he had to reinvent himself post-1974, knowing that he could not achieve that quality of voice anymore. And so he has to work within what he has, and I think he does a great job here. What do you think the title of the song refers to, Animal Farm?
I don't know. Immediately when I saw it on the album, I was thinking George Orwell. Harry was a voracious reader, and I think his favorite authors, he liked 1984. He also liked Ray Bradbury quite a bit. But I didn't know it was about Animal Farm. There are songs, of course, from the blues genre that are about roosters.
Little Red Rooster.
Protagonist here. I don't know. I don't know what he was trying to say. Do you have any insight about that?
That's the reason why I was asking you, because, again, when you listen to some of his lyrics, they are sometimes whimsical in a way and hard to understand, not because the difficulty of the vocabulary that he uses or anything like that, but because I think a lot of the images that he uses make sense to him in his head, but not necessarily to us listening to the song, because there may not be a specific meaning or message behind the songs, but they just sound good to him for the kind of song that he wants to write.
Harry was really focused on his, how can I put it, orality in some ways. It wasn't
the sound of words.
The sound of words. Yeah. If anybody picks up the Nilsson remastered edition, you'll hear him singing a song called Lamaze, and he adopts his French accent. And I played it for our colleague, Lucia Florido, and she said, I have no idea what he's saying, but he has a beautiful pronunciation.
And he does some French in this album, too.
He does do some French in this album. He does a Spanish version of Without You that sounds really, really good. So I think he chose words for their adaptability and their purpose within a song and the melody. And some of his songs, some of his great songs, really make very little sense. What is the Moonbeam song about, actually, when you think about it? I think he chose words just because those are the words, those are the sounds he wanted to produce in a particular song. This could be a case like this, although he also sort of invokes that old standard joke of the farmer's daughter, and the farmer's away, that sort of thing. So,
but that's what rock and roll is all about, really. The expressive power of the song, of the words, and the sound of words. Like what does a wabba-baloo blah-ba-boo mean? Or Tutti Frutti Oh Rudy. There's really nothing behind that, but it's just the power of the sound of words. So he is guided by that a lot in his songwriting. I do agree with that, but I know that you like that song particularly.
Yeah, I think it's one of the best on the album. Probably my second favorite after Woman Oh Woman.
I like it a lot, and I'm a big Dylan fan, and so are you. So that connection, at least the sound of his voice, the connection with Dylan is very nice here. And I also like the fact that it's quite jazzy.
It's very jazzy. Again. Yeah, it's got some of the best arrangement and the best production, I think, that you'll hear on this album.
Now the next one is kind of a rarity in a way, because. And it makes me think about certain things that maybe we can discuss. It's a song called Listen, the Snow is Falling, which was written and also originally performed by Yoko Ono. What do you think about this song? Because when I heard that there was a cover of a Yoko song, I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Well, maybe for many different reasons and maybe stereotypes and preconceptions and things like that. But then I heard it and I thought, wow, this is
really
a pretty
good
song.
Yeah, it was a revelation for me too. If somebody had told me that he had covered a Yoko Ono tune on this album, I would have probably shaken my head. I still remember that video of John and Yoko performing with Chuck Berry when she starts singing, and Chuck Berry looks, look on his face says it all. But it's a very beautiful song. It's not sort of, it's not the melody is sort of repetitive, I guess you could say. It's not structured classically, but it's a very pretty song, and you can almost feel New York City there when they talk about the snow. It sings about the snow falling between the buildings, and it's really well done. It's got the sort of, almost a Japanese sounding strings in it.
Yes, and I wonder if that, because I can't really remember now the original version of Yoko's song, but I wonder if they threw that in as part of the arrangement because of the fact that Yoko is Japanese. I wonder if that's in the song originally or not, but I need to go back and listen to it. But I think that's a very nice touch on this particular song, that they did that. And it makes me, since what you mentioned about Yoko, it makes me think that there are different sides to Yoko's music, in the sense that, she was a performance artist. And so all that yelling and all that shrieking was part of a very typical, 1960s, late 1960s hippie, sort of performance art. And I'm not interested in that in the least, and I'm not really, although I have them, I'm not interested, at least not very much, in the experimental albums that she did with John, at the beginning of their relationship, like Two Virgins or Life with the Lions or the Wedding Album. But by the end of John's life, she does write some songs for, I think it's the Double Fantasy album, which is really an album by John and Yoko, in the sense that he sings some of the songs and she sings some of the songs. And I think it's the Double Fantasy album, or maybe Milk and Honey. But anyway, towards the end
I've never heard the whole Double Fantasy album.
And you have songs by John, and then you have some songs by Yoko, and some of them are really interesting and they're really good. So, this kind of, listening to this song kind of makes me see Yoko under a different light.
Yeah, me too. It's sort of her stock went up from my point of view. Do you know from what album this song is from?
I'm not sure. I didn't look that up, because I once saw a video on YouTube of some person that's a big Beatles fan, and he was, can't remember his name now, but he was doing a video. John Heaton is the name. Now he came to me, and he was doing a video about his collection of Yoko Ono albums. And I must admit that I know very little about her own albums. I know about her collaborations with John, but not so much about her own albums. But the way that Nilsson kind of reworks this song, or the way he sings it, it's very interesting, really.
It's very interesting. It's a really good song, and the fact it has Jim Keltner on drums, Klaus Voormann on bass, and Harry singing, I mean, that's reason enough to listen to it.
Yes, absolutely, and there is a clear connection with the Beatles there.
Absolutely,
with Klaus, and Jim Keltner also played with John throughout his career, some of his albums, and he's a fantastic drummer.
But speaking of connections to the Beatles, what about this next song, Try? First time I heard it, I thought Harry had ripped off All You Need Is Love.
Absolutely, I wrote down Beatlesque harmonies, but it's more than that, you're right.
Even the parts that don't sound like All You Need Is Love sound a little bit belabored to not sound like All You Need Is Love. This is probably the first minor stumble, I think, on this album, but it's not bad. I still like the song quite a bit.
But stumble in the sense that it reminds you too much of a certain song.
Exactly. The standard has been set, the bar raised so high by the previous what is it, 7 songs at this point, that this 8th one just sort of, okay, well, we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt. It's still a good song. I don't skip ahead to the next one when I hear it.
No, it's definitely not my favorite because there are some others that are just so good. You know, that this one, even though it's not bad in the least, and again, reference to the Beatles, at least musically. You know, it can be bad, but you are right. You know, you're listening to this song and you're thinking, this reminds me too much of something. You know,
I guess it's in line with what we've been saying. This is like an album delivered to us from the '60s, and when music on the radio was almost uniformly great, and people listen to radios. We should say. I mean, they don't do that anymore, really. And maybe this song has something to do with the motivation or the inspiration behind this album. Harry just decided to try again. And everybody loves you if you try, as he says. So.
He does. He didn't try very hard not to sound like the Beatles, though. That is for sure.
Hey, there's worse crime somebody could commit, right?
Absolutely. Now the next one, reminds me a little bit of, lyrically at least, of some of those sort of naive, idealistic, late '60s, early '70s lyrics, by the Beatles and others. The title, John was very much on this camp, because it's called "Love is the Answer," isn't it? I mean, isn't love the answer for what?
It's all you need.
One wonders, but what really impressed me about this song, beyond the lyrics, is again the beautiful melody that he's able to come up with on this song.
Yeah, it's a very memorable melody. It's a pretty song, but as you say, there's kind of a tongue-in-cheek sort of quality about it too. Almost like he's conscious of sort of mining that sort of pop music of the '70s that where songs were about love and devotion and all these things that we don't hear much about on the radio anymore.
Well, it also comes from a time when people really did think that they could change the world through music, or that that they could have a certain sort of impact on the political world, and in some ways, some of that did happen.
This is
around the civil rights
movement
in the '60s and stuff.
Yeah, this is the kind of topic that the millennials would say is cheesy, right? And from our point of view, I think we've got a little more experience with it since, we were, well, at least I was around the age when stuff like this was on the airwaves. But
I mean, I do see sort of the naive quality of it, but at the same time, with songs like this, Nilsson shows again that his heart is in the right place. But I can't help thinking that maybe this kind of song, and maybe Try, were two songs that gave the company executives a reason to say, "Hey, you're stuck in the past, man. You need to move on from that sort of consciousness or state of mind."
Yeah.
I wouldn't agree with the executives in the least, but I have the feeling that this might have something to do with it. I don't know, but it is a beautiful song, and I really like listening to it, and in fact, I do like it more than the previous one, than Try. Love is the Answer.
it maybe invokes some of the standards that you and I like so much, and that Harry sang, and a touch of Nilsson in the Night. The Love is the Answer. It's a song from a different era, I would say.
We might mention that at least one of his sons is involved with the production of this record. Kifo Nilsson. And then he also has collaborated on a couple of these tracks with Perry Botkin Jr. Now, Perry Botkin Jr., you might not necessarily know who he is.
I don't know who he is.
But he is the son of Perry Botkin, the jazz guitar player that used to play with Hoagie Carmichael and with Bing Crosby, with the Buddy Cole trio that backed Bing Crosby up in the '50s and '60s on radio and stuff. His father, Perry Botkin Sr., was a great guitar player in the jazz world. And Perry Botkin Jr. Was good friends with Harry Nilsson. And
so there's more than a thematic connection to those great standards.
Yes.
You know, before it's
absolutely. I mean, I think Harry
bloodline that goes back.
Harry appreciated not just the standards, but also jazz. Very much. I think jazz was very close to his heart, and I think that's why a lot of his songs are have so much swing and are jazzy in many ways. But the next one though has been very criticized, very harshly too, by some of the reviewers of this album, Losst and Founnd, by Harry Nilsson. And I don't understand why. It's a song called Yo, Dodger Blue. Dodger there meaning a certain baseball team that started out in Brooklyn and moved halfway, well, not halfway, all the way across the country to L.A.
Just like Harry.
Just like just like he did, and just like Graham Parsons did too. It's about the L.A. Dodgers, or for the L.A. Dodgers, or inspired by them. But in any case, I don't see anything to criticize about this song. It is a fun tune.
It is
really
a fun
bouncy.
tune.
It's just joyful,
There are a lot of songs that sound like this one sometimes, and maybe that's what they take exception to. It's kind of, in some ways, it's kind of that boilerplate, repetitive chorus, big drums. You could almost predict the point where there's nothing but Keltner on the drums in the chorus. You know what I mean? Where the other instruments stop and then they go back, and so it's kind of a rah-rah kind of tune.
I wonder why he wrote this song.
I really don't know. Some part of me thinks that maybe it has something to do with his financial difficulties. He was trying to peddle it to the Dodgers organization or
Could
something.
be.
I don't know. And I never knew he was such a baseball fan either.
I'm not even sure he was. Maybe he was. I mean, he definitely grew up at a time when baseball was more a part of American culture than it is now. When people actually did flock to the stadiums in a way that maybe people don't do as much anymore.
He certainly wasn't concerned about his record selling in the San Francisco Bay market, because they wouldn't want anything to do with this song.
But it's another one of those where after a while it just gets in your head, and you just
for better or for worse.
Yes, you start humming it and singing along with it. Not much to say about it though, but it is a fun-filled tune. It's joyful and I like it. I never would skip it. But when you read some of the reviewers, they really bash this song. At least some of them did. Maybe on Rolling Stone or some other place. I know I read a review somewhere online that really bashed this song and almost felt like I would have to skip it, but absolutely not. I like it, and it's towards the end of the album. I think again it's well placed towards the end.
Sometimes when I think about some of the albums that I like from the 60s and the 70s, there is that kind of song that's towards the end of the album where they get all the roadies and all the people in the studio who maybe don't have an instrument, but they come together and they put them on the chorus. Do you know what I mean? So and you can see there's a bigger list of background vocalists on this particular album. Everybody gets to sing on the album. So maybe, Harry didn't hit it out of the park with Dodger Blue, but at least he got everybody involved.
And finally we get towards the end of the album.
His greatest albums are like that too, though. I mean, there's a couple of songs on some of his best albums that aren't quite duds, but they're not up to the standards of his other things.
I would even go as far as to say that I feel that way about Coconut sometimes.
Yeah, that's a very good. You either love it or you hate it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't dislike it, but I don't think it's the kind of song that he recorded thinking that it was going to become the big hit that it became.
Yeah, exactly.
And to kind of close the album and also our conversation about this CD that you can also find on vinyl called Harry Nilsson Losst and Founnd, with double S that lost and double N that found, that just came out a couple of months ago, the end of 2019, actually on my birthday. And
November
in 2019, November 22nd.
Although you got this album for me for Christmas.
I did, but I have it too. I bought a copy for myself because it's just an album that is really recommendable. And if you like Harry Nilsson, you should seek it out and buy it because it really is a good addition. On Omnivore Recordings.
Omnivore Recordings.
So the fine people that put it out. But this final song on the album was not written by Harry. It was written by Jimmy Webb, and it's called "What Does a Woman See in a Man?"
I would venture, I'm not a betting man, but I would say that he may have written the melody, but Harry's stamp is on these lyrics. They are so irreverent, ridiculous, hilarious, on a song where we have this really rich, almost overblown orchestration. It's just the result is hilarious. And he describes, well, you'll have to hear this song yourself.
And I think
don't you think he did the lyrics?
I think if he didn't do the lyrics, he definitely, approved of the message.
Yeah.
Because you're right. I think you touched upon something that is very important about this song, which is there's a complete disconnect between the arrangement on this song and the melody on this song, which sounds like a standard, sounds like, a serious song about love, going back to, the Great American Songbook, and all of a sudden the lyrics are completely a joke in that sense. They're kind of poking fun at love, at the idea of romantic love, and the idea of what might attract a woman to a man.
Yeah, it's a mystery, and he raises. It's a good question sometimes when you think about it. What does a woman see in a man, particularly some guys? This is something Harry's done before, right? This is what's the name of the country western spoof, the country spoof that he did on Son of Schmilson?
Yeah, that's right.
It's the same sort of thing. It's got this arrangement that represents one kind of music, but his vocals are just over the top, ridiculous, hilarious. It's that same kind of thing. I wish I remembered the name of that song. It's a third song.
Well, we'll look it up, and maybe I'll
add it on talking about.
I'll add it on a comment, or if somebody's listening to this, they can just comment right underneath the video, and we can and then we'll know. But
it's a great album. It's got something for everybody, and for it to come out so late, it's definitely. It's been worth the wait. One review I read said that this isn't the great Lost Harry Nilsson album. No, it is. I really feel that it is. It's great, and it's been found.
So, just to close our conversation, which I've really enjoyed, as always, whenever we get together to talk about a specific album here on the podcast, I would like to ask you just to finish. We've talked about the album a lot. We've talked about the later years of Harry's career that led up to this album and to these recording sessions, which were left unfinished in '94 when he passed away. What do you think that this album, Losst and Founnd, really adds to the discography of Harry Nilsson, and why should anyone listening to this go out and buy this album, or get a digital download of it, or however people listen to music these days? Why do you think? What do you think that this adds to his discography and to his legacy? And what are the strong points of this album from the point of view of a listener like you or like myself, who really enjoys the music and the figure of Harry Nilsson?
Well, I think regardless of the age of the person who downloads it or buys the CD, if you like great melodies, if you like great musicianship, if you like clever lyrics, Harry Nilsson is right up their alley. For somebody like me or like you who have some experience and listen to his early albums, this to me sort of puts a bow and gives me some sort of satisfaction on his career, because I felt that it ended way too quickly. And I think he really struggled at the end and went through some hard times. But as I said, this is sort of a revindication of Harry Nilsson as a musical artist. And on top of that, like any great artistic accomplishment, on something that they had done before, an artist, it adds a little something, and I see kind of a softer, a warmer, a more sensitive Harry, not the sort of callous, difficult to work with sort of Harry. Disenchanted
Yeah.
Harry, you know, who swore and did things and almost sabotaged his own career.
It's also an older Harry.
It's an older Harry, yeah. So he's mellowed out in some ways. It's a great. It does two things really well. It invokes those great songs that he did before, and it stands at the level of those great songs before.
Absolutely.
So to me, I think it's a great bridge between his early career, which is fantastic, unfortunately not well known to a lot of people, I don't think, and this. And so I really encourage people to get this album.
So it's more than just a coda for you. It's more than just an epilogue for it.
It's a coda,
for his
but it
career.
adds something.
Mm-hmm.
It adds something great. It enhances what went before, which, you know, in this kind of album, you know, made posthumously, that usually doesn't happen. Usually people mess up the legacy of somebody. I mean, look at all the re-releases of different artists we like. They found some things in the vault, they took them out, they outsourced the musicianship, the arrangements, and look at the result. It's terrible.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's something that doesn't happen here. You may like some of the songs better than others.
It's a recipe for disaster.
But I don't think there's a single song on here that sounds like it shouldn't be there. Like, why did he record this? Why did they put this on here? No, all of them really, you know, stand together really well, one after the other. Like you said before, I think the sequencing was really well done. And most of all, to me, this was a very, very happy, very good surprise from the past to the present. And I think, you know, I remember being happy to hear this album was coming out when I first heard about it on the Beatles channel.
And what
But
did you
then
think?
thinking at the same
think,
time, you know, but what are they doing? They've been tampering with these songs, you know, and they have, but they have done a good job. I think, you know, the work of Mark Hudson here has been wonderful, and they're just good songs to begin with, but they were not spoiled in any way by the action of the producer and the musicians that are all top notch.
But a terrific job, I think. They did a terrific job in bringing in the old musicians and the cohorts that Harry had who knew him. That made all the difference, I think. You know, they had good things to work with, his demos and his vocals he left behind, and maybe, you know, he recorded some tracks with more musical arrangement. They had enough to work with. To me, it's a testament to Harry, and in some ways he was so unpredictable and kind of classic. The one thing you can sort of expect from him is the unexpected, and we have it here with this last album of his.
Absolutely, and the last album of his, for now at least, is called Losst and Founnd, double S and double N, Harry Nilsson, produced by Mark Hudson, and released just a couple of months ago, by the fine people at Omnivore Recordings.
Do you think this album is going to sell?
I'm not sure how much albums sell these days, you know, but
we're not even in an album-oriented market anymore.
What I would say is that anyone who knows Harry Nilsson and that remembers him and likes him would be a fool not to go out and buy this album, because it really does add something, like you said. And to me, it's really agreeable to the ear. It's a nice addition to his discography.
If any Harry Nilsson fans are out there and they're wondering, I don't want to get this because I'm not going to like it, you know, his best albums are the ones I'm going to listen to, we vehemently encourage you to get this album. It stands with his earlier stuff.
And there really isn't any reason to, you know, compare this to earlier stuff, but even if you were to compare it does really stand right up there with a lot of the great work that he did before. So it really is a good album, worthwhile listening to and owning. Losst and Founnd by Harry Nilsson on Omnivore Recordings. Dan, it's been a pleasure talking to you again.
Well, it's always a pleasure, Anton.
And let's do this again real soon at some point.
Absolutely.
There's many recordings that we could be talking about, just like we did today with Harry Nilsson. Thank you so much, Dan.
It's been a pleasure.
This has been a new episode of Discos Memorables, or Memorable Records, about Harry Nilsson's Losst and Founnd with Dan Nappo and Anton Garcia-Fernandez, minus the copyright of this recording, which was done live in Martin, in the great state of Tennessee, in the year of 2020. Thank you so much for listening, and so long, everybody.